There's the my favorite woman ever, the recording in progress woman. Love it. Okay, amazing. So I'll also share, I put a little note in the chat before I say anything else that this session today, you probably signed up, so you might know a little bit about what it's about. You might not really know, which is even better. I love that you're in space learning with us today. But conversations that are about, environmental racism, environmental justice, and lived experiences, which, if you are from Canada or any part of the world, are very real human experiences in our society in 2026 and have been for a very long time. And we recognize that. And we do have a few mental health first aiders in the room, but we are not a crisis service. So we recognize that, some different emotions can come up when you're here today because these are sensitive topics for a lot of people and can bring up a lot of thoughts and feelings, which is okay. I just want to do a quick reminder to please take care of yourself in this session. If you need to log off without and telling us, that is totally fine. You can leave, you can come back, you can step away, even just taking a break. You can have your camera on or off. This is a very casual session. We get it. It's been a long day for a lot of us, especially those on the east coast of Canada. It's the evening, so cameras on or off are totally okay. If you need to walk away or eat during the session, we get it. Everyone is so busy, so we appreciate you just taking the time to be with us. And also, if there's some negative emotions that come up, I really encourage you to reach out to someone you trust in your life after the session if you'd like to debrief or discuss it. And if you need any immediate mental health support, I really encourage you to call or text 988. That is the Canada's crisis helpline that's available 24/7 at any time. So yeah, that's just my quick reminder. Please take care of yourself. That is being a good advocate and is so, so important to take care of yourself as a part of your advocacy toolkit. So it is so, so key. So yeah, that's my little disclaimer. Anyway, I'm going to introduce just all to session today. So today you are at the Impacting Canada's National Strategy Respecting Environmental Racism and Environmental Justice, which is our first webinar as a part of the JEDI webinar series that we are doing with the Mental Health and Climate Change Alliance in partnership with the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. And we're also so excited to be joined today by special guests, which are our friends at Shake Up the Establishment, also known as SUIT by a lot of people across Canada. And to be very brief on this, I am so grateful I get to be a youth advisor with the Mental Health and Climate Change Alliance, which is an amazing organization that works with an interdisciplinary team of researchers, healthcare folks, community organizations, and other organizations that are committed to identifying and addressing the adverse impacts of climate crisis on mental health across Canada. And our funding partner, who we absolutely love, is the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, who are an incredible federal crown corporation that is mandated to raise public awareness of the causes of and manifestations of racism across Canada. We are so lucky that we were able to work with them and to deliver the series. And our special guests tonight are our besties from the ITS network. It's the Suit folks. We are so glad that they are here. Shake up the establishment. If you do not know about them, you probably do. They are quite popular. They are a national nonprofit organization that works very hard to advance intersectional environmental and climate justice by fostering civic participation and youth leadership. And they drive systemic change through nonpartisan policy advocacy and shifting public narratives through all different ways, including creative arts-based campaigns and many other. Full to be joined by them today. Next slide. And then we need to do a land acknowledgement, of course. And because I am so honored to be in the position to run our land acknowledgement today, I like to make it a little personal. And I hope that all of us in this moment can take a step back to also do a land acknowledgement for yourself, thinking about where you're from. If you want to share in the chat, please feel free to. Um, just recognizing that, myself, I'm Jenna. I grew up in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is on the ancestral unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And now I currently, in my adult life, I live in Ottawa on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. And since today's topic is about Canada's national strategy respecting environmental racism and environmental justice, I think it is especially important to recognize that not everyone experiences our environment equally. And together today, I hope we can learn from one another and continue building a future where everyone has access to healthy, safe, and thriving communities. And thank you so much for being here. And I don't know if Anaya is with us right now or
I'm here.
not. Oh, perfect. I'm going to pass it off to Anaya, and she's going to share a little bit more about what MHCCA does, and then we'll get right into it and see what's going to take over and teach us some pretty powerful stuff.
Hi everyone. So my name is Naya Berry, and I'm a part of the Youth Advisory Board of MHCCA. So as you see right here, we're talking a little bit about what MHCCA is, and we're basically a mental health and climate change alliance that works for addressing problems between about the intersectionality of mental health and climate change, and it's a collective impact network of researchers, healthcare providers, community organizers, and we're and a bunch of different organizations committed to identifying and addressing the adverse impacts of climate crisis on mental health. So, an example of that could be climate anxiety. Sorry, next slide. So, this is our team where the um, youth Sorry, I think that muted me. Um, we're all part of MHCCA's Youth Advisory Board, and we support MHCCA with their projects and provide a youth perspective on their work, like their toolkits and multiple different projects. And we all come from different areas from across Canada and all are from very different backgrounds. So we all offer a diverse perspective. So MACCA does a lot of work, but one specific thing that we're working on right now is a webinar series. Like Jenna said, this is our first webinar, and it's part one of the series. So please join us in September for our event focused on Indigenous climate and health leaderships, and details are going to come. But throughout the year, we're going to be hosting webinars every month, so I hope you all can join. Thank you.
That was so great. Thank you, Anaya, and thank you everyone for listening to our little introduction. So now I'm going to pass it off officially to the suit folks who are going to lead us through tonight's discussion. Again, so beyond grateful for the partnership with them that we've been able to build and having them collaborate with us on this session. It was, to be honest, a very last minute endeavor, and these guys are true trailblazers when it comes to this work, and so beyond blessed to have, them as part of our group. And again, thank you so much to the Canadian Race Relations Foundation for being able to support us in being able to do this work, because without them, we couldn't. So take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Manvi. My pronouns are she and her. I'm the executive director and co-founder of Shake Up the Establishment. And I just want to thank all of you for being here. And also thank you to the host for inviting us. And although it was last minute, as was mentioned, we are quite passionate about this topic. So it's hard to get me and Anna to stay away. We will try to move a mountain to try to engage more people in this policy. So I'll keep it brief because we have a lot to get through, but I just wanted to say up front that really appreciate the invitation and I'm grateful to hold space with you all to discuss such an important initiative and really grateful that people showed up because it's a conversation that really needs more community engagement. So there's no prior background required to take part in the activities today. I will deliver a short presentation that tries to provide some common language, a basic understanding. If you're new to this topic, hopefully it offers some important historical and contemporary updates on what this issue is in Canada, what it looks like, and what we can do to help address the issues that I highlight. And the latter half of this will be a very interactive session where we'll be working on some letters together, and there'll be opportunities to talk to each other and also opportunities to have some quiet time to just actually have some time to write something down because I know it's very hard in our busy lives to find time to just like put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, but not for a work deliverable. And in this case, really for civic engagement. So, yeah, next slide, please. And I think we were already introduced quite well, so I don't think we have to dwell on this, but I just wanted to say, yes, exactly. Next slide. And I was just going to say that what's really important about the work that we do is our policy advocacy side of work, in particular, is we're really trying to make the most of the policy moment that we are in. And right now, Canada has a known environmental racism problem. On June 26th, the government of Canada released their first ever draft strategy to address environmental racism and advance environmental justice. So, getting to this point, which I'll show in a few slides to come, a timeline of how we got here was really hard. And so, right now, I'm giving you like your first preview of understanding this, but then I'm going to start the story from the beginning and take you to the end again. But in this preview, I just want to explain to you that the moment that we're in right now is that the government has released their draft. And I have to be honest with you guys, we've read this draft line by line, reviewed it. It's not great. It needs a lot of feedback. And that's why there's a consultation period open. It's opportunities for everybody in Canada to engage and give feedback so that when the final strategy is released in the fall, it looks like a lot better. And I want to mention as well that there's no like dedicated federal funding for community consultation. So it's really important that, initiatives like this happen where we're trying to bring together with what funding is available out there, organizations like MHCCA and like ours and a number of others, trying to pull together what we can to try to interface with community members about this important issue because um, i- contrary to the whole point of addressing and advancing environmental justice, it's a core tenet that people should have access to these processes, but obviously without funding, that often becomes hard. So I'm really proud that we were able to throw this together with the team and really grateful that this happened. Next slide, please. Next, please. So I'm going to start by just guiding today's discussion. As I mentioned, we're going to try to provide some definitions and some understanding. Some of you might be familiar with this. Some of you might be new to this topic. And I'm very happy to go slower and go back to certain things. We have a Q&A after the presentation. So if you'd like to put some questions, you want to hold on to your questions until then, you're welcome to. We can also share the link to the slides if you want to reference. So I'm going to try to move at a good pace for our because we only have so much time in this meeting. But you're welcome to kind of just use this as an opportunity to process this for the first time and know that the conversation doesn't have to end here. We can provide all the resources for you to come back to these materials at a pace that works for you, work through them, and finish the letter writing outside of the session as well. So there's a lot of options. It's all negotiable. So I'll start by defining environmental racism, which refers to the ways that it's a systemic issue where Indigenous, Black, racialized, migrant, newcomer communities are disproportionately exposed to environmental harms while being excluded from environmental decision making that can change their health for the better. In Canada, environmental racism, we often see it through patterns of disproportionate placement of polluting industries, waste sites, environmentally hazardous projects. So you could think about, industrial pollution, for example, and other risks that are placed near where pockets of these communities live, predominantly. And then also at the same time, like there are many barriers that these communities face that reduce their representation when it comes to interacting with decision makers that are able to make changes for them and improve their health. And so I want to just talk about these three things on the slide here. Environmental justice itself, advancing it means advancing it in a multi-pronged approach. There's more layers than this as well. These are three of the key layers, though, that we really need to address to ensure that there's justice. So the first would be distributive justice. There is an unequal distribution of harm. There are certain groups that are facing higher exposure to environmental hazards, and we need to address that. There's also procedural justice, which is decision-making power. If you don't have access to decision-making processes, you get stuck and it's not your fault, but the inability to have that power reduces agency for communities to change their own health outcomes. And the third is recognitional. And so this piece requires understanding that knowledge and histories and lived experience of affected communities are legitimate and really shape how they interact with governance systems. So, for example, if there's mistrust of a process, like maybe there are racialized newcomers or Indigenous groups or Black communities represented within decision-making processes, but maybe they feel tokenized, and that recognizes that kind of recognitional justice kind of looks into the idea that, maybe they're there, but there's a mistrust of the system, and that's for a good reason. It also encourages us to look at the influences of settler colonialism and other aspects that create more marginalization for these communities. And so it forces us to look beyond just, the obvious first two, but really looking at like a systemic issue. There are other forms of justice as well. There's epistemic justice, which is where, we want to consider that communities' knowledge is inherently expertise, and we don't need technical expertise all the time. We need that plus community knowledge. There's also healing justice, which works to rebuild trust and work on advancing reconciliation and intergenerational healing. But for now, the three that are listed here, I can say are three that are really important, and they're also in the draft strategy. So we wanted to take a minute to define them. Next slide, please. So over the next like 4 or 5 slides, I'm going to take you guys through some of the key racialized and indigenous populations that are experiencing environmental racism and different ways that they are. But I am going to do it at a high level. So Anna and I are very happy to share additional resources for any of these examples or communities if you're interested and want more information. So we're starting off by acknowledging that, in Canada, Indigenous communities experience some of the most severe forms of environmental racism. And it's important to be clear about why. It's directly related to settler colonialism, which is both legacy and present day. It's an ongoing process. Not only did the reserve system confine Indigenous peoples to a small fraction of their territories, but often on land that government and industry would later then treat as available for extraction or disposal. And the decision about pipelines, landfills, mines, industrial facilities on the in and around these lands is often made without Indigenous communities' free, prior, and informed consent. And so this reflects a system that continues to treat both land and people as expendable. And some of the reasons people kind of wonder, like, why might this happen? Well, one of the key reasons is because, and there are many reasons, but one of them is that there's a jurisdictional gap, basically, a lot of the time, where a lot of the Indigenous communities, like Indigenous affairs, is kind of like a federal government portfolio item. So the federal government is supposedly responsible, but if a spill happens or there's environmental hazards, sometimes those are like in other jurisdictions, provincial responsibility. So they kind of play the game of like, we don't know who's responsible for this. Is your responsibility or it's your responsibility? And they pass it back and forth, and the problem doesn't get addressed. So it's a unique population in the sense that not only is Canada a settler colonial project, and there's inherently a lot to be unpacked there, but it's also within the settler colonial governance system, Indigenous communities continue to be underserved, and there's a lack of clear responsibility for addressing the underservice that they face. The two examples that we highlight here on this slide is Grassy Narrows First Nation continues to live with intergenerational impacts of mercury that was released in their river systems by a paper mill in the 60s and 70s, which contaminated the fish, the water, and the economy. And not only did it do that, but it caused long-term health impacts and neurological effects that persist to this day from the mercury poisoning. So if you look into Grassy Narrows, you'll find that the government has since done a settlement and established a mercury healing center, but there's still so much to be done, and the community still hasn't, not only have they not fully recovered, they're leading a lot of advocacy for environmental racism in Canada, and still trying to push for a lot of recommendations that they need for their community to be resourced to have this issue handled. Another example is Omjawon First Nation. They sit in Ontario's Chemical Valley, and they're surrounded by dozens of facilities that account for about 40% of Canada's petrochemical industry. And so these industries around them constantly emit so many pollutants, one of the most harmful ones being benzene and sulfur dioxide, which are linked to elevated rates of cancer and respiratory illness. So the health impacts cannot be understated. All of these environmental issues are health issues. I think that's something that you'll see throughout this presentation, and throughout this topic as a whole, is that really we're talking about environmental health inequities, coupled with racism and other systemic forms of oppression that create the conditions for communities to lack, agency over their health outcomes. In 2024, there was a state of emergency declared in Amjawon First Nation because the community, the benzene levels were so high, and it's a known carcinogen, as I mentioned. So it's like it is a state of emergency if you're constantly living with air that's polluted with carcinogens, and you have no say and no ability to kind of change that outcome. Next slide, please. And so it's really important as well that this isn't just like a physical health issue, it's also a mental health issue. And so using this as an opportunity to kind of explore the impacts of exposures in this way, Indigenous communities are experiencing decreased mental, like mental health supports and experiencing a lot of mental health impacts as a result of environmental exposures as well. Not only is the climate crisis something that is consistently causing a lot of issues connecting with spiritual, mental, and physical health and breaking or harming, I should say, connections to the land and cultural continuance and knowledge continuance intergenerationally. But it's also really impacting just general mental well-being across all generations. So we kind of found here that over 50% of respondents in a community facilitated survey by Amjimon First Nation found that their health and well-being was negatively impacted by noise, vibration, and odors. And this is because the facilities that surround their community are causing these exposures and they're at such a high rate. Like if you could imagine constantly like alarms going off when there is a spill or there is an emission of something that's very carcinogenic in the air, carcinogenic meaning being cancer causing. And so that they have to immediately shut their windows and go into a lockdown. That fear that that could happen at any moment, or even flaring is something that they're very susceptible to seeing. So flaring is when industries burn off harmful gases. And so that light, the glow of flaring is like very can be very traumatic if you're like, oh, when you see that, you associate it with like, oh my gosh, they're emitting and burning off something that's so harmful and it's in the air around me now and I have no agency. I'm just gonna have to close my windows and lock down. If I was planning on going for a walk, if I was planning on connecting with the river, that's not an option for me right now. So really having your life be run by the industries that surround your home is very, very harmful. And so we also have a quote here on the screen from one of our participants at a community engagement, community consultation session we had. They're an Indigenous youth who's actually been a part of our organization and done a lot of great work with us as well, Atreyu. And they were discussing that, you know, when they speak with a lot of other Indigenous youth in the city, and the city being Toronto, where they were discussing at the time. There's been a lot of lack of resources for healing on the land. People feel disconnected, can't do stewardship and environmental efforts because they feel they can't get engaged. They don't know enough. They don't have access to cultural knowledge. And it's interesting. The context of this was really talking about how, for many Indigenous communities, cultural continuance is so much about land-based learning and being in community on land. And it's increasingly hard with the climate crisis and heat events and wildfires, not to mention environmental exposures. So it's mental health is definitely a big part of this story. Next, please. And so moving into the water crisis, this is another example of Indigenous communities continuing to be underserved. And this is where that jurisdictional gap that I mentioned earlier really shows itself. Water is one of the clearest patterns of underservice by the government of Canada. Canada holds nearly 20% of the world's fresh water, and yet dozens of First Nations cannot safely drink from their tap. Right now, there's 38 long-term drinking advisories across 36 communities. And although that seems like significant, I want to say more than 150 of these have been lifted since 2015. So it's clearly possible to lift these and get to zero. The promise was to get to zero a lot longer ago. It's been way too long that these are persisting and not being prioritized. This really comes down to like, is it a priority for the government at this point? Because it's possible to get rid of these, but it's just not been a priority. Next, please. Black communities in Canada face a parallel problem. Rooted in anti-Black racism, polluting industries and waste is most concentrated near Black communities in certain regions. So, Nova Scotia being an area where this has been demonstratedly been found quite consistently. The story here is that of Freakville, which was a self-sufficient community, predominantly Black, and at the time, the city of Halifax not only refused to provide municipal services that the area deserved because people were paying taxes for that, which include clean water, sewers, and paved roads, but also, without their consent, they located a lot of hazardous infrastructure right next to the city. And then in the 1960s, they just demolished the city in the name of urban renewal, which is very racist coded. The whole thing is very racist. But there was no consultation. And so families that had to be forcibly relocated obviously were upset. And there still is no compensation for what happened here. And this is a historic example. Next slide, please. But this continues to the present day. Dr. Ingrid Waldron has mapped this out with her team at the Enrich Project, and you can see consistently that there's a consistent pattern of polluting industries and landfills being located closer to certain communities. Next, please. Um, I have one more community to mention before I run into the strategy itself. And I know that timing wise, it's like there's so much more that could be shared. So some of the slides I'm going to be a little bit shorter in, but I'm very happy to answer some questions in the Q&A as well. But I wanted to talk a little bit about racialized immigrants because this is a population that next to nobody is studying. I'm one of the only people through my PhD at UBC that I also am currently completing. And through that space and through Suits work, we've been able to begin to advocate for this community. But even in recently speaking with the government that's working, the government officials that are working on the draft strategy, they said that nobody but our group had advocated for this community. So it's a really important one that I want to highlight today. And so racialized communities experience cumulative exposures across all the places they spend time in a lot of the time. This is a bit like a very layered exposure. And so there's been emerging studies where, they found that immigrants, and again, to quote the study language, areas of ethnic concentration are exposed to more air pollution in Toronto and in Vancouver. There's also studies that have found that South Asian and Filipino communities, for example, in Toronto, are more often and more likely to be living within 2 kilometers of high pollution emitting facilities. And there are more studies that we can begin to share with you, but honestly, there isn't a lot of research, which is why there's no dedicated, funding or consultations happening. In the draft strategy, the word immigrant, newcomer, these were not mentioned, not once. It just shows that there is a huge, huge, huge issue where majority of our racialized population in Canada is racialized immigrants. Most of them coming from South Asian or East Asian origins. And so this is a majority population that is not being at all considered as part of a conversation on environmental racism, which is so alarming. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to skip this slide because for time. Next, please. Um, and I'm just going to show this slide, but I'm happy to go into this more if somebody's really curious about it. Just wanted to show you how long it took to get to this point. You can see that the process formally started in 2022. Even before 2022, many community groups were advocating for something like this to be happening. In America, and I can't say that any of the progress is maintained under the current administration, but I can say that they started this process a lot earlier. We're about 30 to 35 years behind, quote unquote, the US, which I hate to say, just in terms of setting forth a precedent to develop the first strategy to address this. The US had 30 years ago begun this process for themselves. And so we're quite behind. And also globally speaking, we're also, given how serious the problem is in Canada, we have a lot of work to do. So I'm really glad you're all here. And I just want to highlight the last two pieces here. So like summer 2026, as I just mentioned, they just released their strategy and you have until August 10th to weigh in on it. And then the final strategy will be released in the fall. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go pretty quickly through some key areas that the current strategy lacks. I will say that there's a lot more that could be said, and we've gone back and forth about these slides, but their strategy is like so long that there's no way we can. It's also very hard to summarize because when we tried summarizing it, we actually made it sound better than how it's written. I hate to say it. So I want to say to you guys, we've read the strategy in and out. We can answer any questions. We're going to highlight some of our biggest issues with the strategy, but that doesn't mean that you have to, in your recommendations, say exactly what we say. It also means that you're welcome to disagree with any of our interpretations. We're just trying to help expedite the process for you all, since there's only 5 days until the consultation period ends. So if anything that we share in terms of feedback, you're wondering like, what did they write originally? Like, why do you have an issue with it? We are very happy to share with you. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, when you think of a strategy, you're hoping that there are some kind of commitments. Unfortunately, this strategy has no commitments. There's no timelines, there's no measurable targets, there's no performance indicators. there's a lot of like could instead of should, if that makes sense. Like the language is very weak. And there are no consequences if commitments are not implemented, nor are there any enforcement mechanisms. So really right now when you read the strategy, it reads kind of like they took a lot of words that are really important, but didn't really tie them to any kind of actual plan or action, any next steps, really. There are none highlighted in the strategy. I'm very unclear about how any aspect of it is being implemented at this time. Next, please. The process has been prioritized over the action. So, like I was just saying, much of the document contents focuses on future research, but it's very vague. There's no actual plans to do the research. It's just kind of generically like someone should do the research. There's also kind of a mention at one point. It says we should we should develop an action plan, which I will be honest with you, many of us were hoping that this would be the action plan. So to have one of the only commitments be that we need to develop an action plan felt a little bit um, uh, backwards for this. However, of course, we agree that there needs to be an action plan. It does need to focus on things beyond just kind of posturing language. The document really focuses on describing all the things that are hindering the process of taking action. But so it's a very descriptive and long document. It just doesn't really have any steps to actually address the issues that they identified. Next, please. There are significant gaps in implementation. So, part of this process, as I showed you that big timeline, what happened was there was a bill that was created, and in that bill, there were guidelines for how this strategy should be developed. When that bill got passed, it was law that this strategy must be developed in that way. And as part of that, the requirement was that that they would consider how they can change existing laws, policies, how they could maybe even provide compensation to people, how communities can be more empowered to take part in decision making, how there can be stronger mechanisms for oversight and accountability. But unfortunately, the actual draft of the strategy does not address any of that. So even though those were things that they were expected to discuss in detail, they did not at all in the strategy. There's no mention of compensation at all in the strategy, just to give you an example. Whereas, like, it was very clear when the bill was passed that that was on the table. Next, please. They did a study. I can say this so briefly. It was a horribly done study in the sense of like it was sophisticated analysis, but they didn't even include the findings. There's no clear next step. A lot more work needs to be done. The study was probably one of the most disappointing aspects of this. It did not find anything. So next, please. Um, in Canada in 2023, it was legally recognized that everybody in Canada has the right to a healthy environment. This is not mentioned significantly at all in the strategy, which feels very confusing because it's a legal right that Canadians have, but it's not at all considered as part of this. Next, please. Um, the I've kind of already mentioned this. Next, please. Um, they there was no funding for consultations essentially. And so communities that participated, like ours, like all of us, it's based on our own want to participate. And there hasn't been very clear guidance or transparency from the government about also when we do engage, does it actually lead to something? Or has it had an impact essentially? And normally the government's supposed to release what we heard reports and be transparent about these kinds of things. But they haven't, and there's no compensation for community consultations, there's no outreach mechanisms. It's a very under-resourced process overall, which is a disservice to the communities that are impacted by environmental racism. Next, please. Um, as I mentioned earlier, there's no mention of racialized immigrants, newcomers, migrants, migrant workers, Black communities as a distinct population. Everybody is just racialized or indigenous. There's also no mention of gendered impacts, impacts for disabled people, occupational exposures. Like work is just completely separate now in your life. If you get exposed at work and you get exposed anywhere else, apparently it's different, even though you're one person. So that makes no sense. And so it's like very, very challenging to provide feedback. Like, for example, women and gender diverse people face their own additional vulnerabilities with environmental exposures, and none of those things are acknowledged at all. Next, please. So yes, overall, the strategy is an important foundation, but there is a lot of work to be done. Next, please. So, on that note, which is I know maybe not the happiest note, we want to energize people to say that yes, there's a lot of work to be done, and here's your opportunity to help. I'm going to pass it to Anna, and knowing like the time that we have left as well, we probably will take about 15 minutes for this exercise, 15 to 20, and then come back about 5 minutes, or we could kind of stay in the room. I think. Oh. I think maybe we should do breakout rooms. Sorry, that was a game time decision, but it seems like we have enough people that maybe we'll split into two rooms. But I'll pass it to Anna to just briefly describe this activity, and I'll put some links in the chat. But I want to thank you all for listening. I know there's a lot of information there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mandy. And before I get too into it, let me introduce myself. Like Mandy mentioned, she and I love to discuss this topic and particularly this policy topic. And sometimes I have joined discussion sessions on this and completely forgotten to give context as to who I am. So hi everyone, my name is Anna. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the director of policy at Shake Up the Establishment. And so I'm just going to give us a few instructions to help guide us through this letter writing activity. But again, we're going to be in some breakout rooms. Myself and Manby will be there if there's any questions and any additional supports we can provide, as well as the MHCCA team is here to help with any supports as well. So in the chat, Manby is going to share the link to a customizable PDF or a Google Doc copy of a letter template addressed to the Environmental Justice and Racism team at Environment and Climate Change Canada. So these are the folks who are currently accepting feedback to hopefully update the strategy and make a better version of it for us to see this fall. So please access whatever format works best for you. Just to note that if you're going to use the Google Doc copy, to please be sure to download a copy or copy paste the text into a new document before you start typing. So this letter template we've provided for you includes a few prompts. The first invites you to reflect on how you have experienced or learned about environmental racism. The second asks what you want the government to do to address environmental racism. And the third is open space for any additional reflections, thoughts, or perspectives. There are no wrong answers here. You don't need to be an expert on this topic. So like Mandy mentioned, we're going to spend the next 15 minutes or so responding to these prompts and drafting our letters. The MHCCA team is going to split us up into breakout rooms. I believe we were going to do two breakout rooms. One is going to be a room that is like a bit quieter. So if you just want to be able to like lock in on your computer and write a letter, you can join that room. And then as well, there will be another room where we'll have some discussion prompts. So that way we can continue to learn from each other throughout this drafting process. Just to note, you don't have to complete your letter during this event. You're welcome to keep adding to it or drafting more than one letter. We also encourage you to save these links and to share the letter template with your peers. Please write in whatever language you are most comfortable in. If you have any questions, you're welcome to unmute and ask, share them in the chat, or DM myself or Manby or a member of the MHCCA team for more information. And yeah, if you'd like us to go back to any of our previous slides as well, we all have the slide deck. So please let us know and we'll be happy to do so. And yeah, wishing you all happy writing. Alrighty, perfect. Firstly, I just want to say thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. For myself and Manby, this is a topic that we've been working on for years, and we're so grateful that all of you took the time out of your afternoons, evenings to listen to us speak about it and to have conversation and to take action on this topic. And again, really grateful to Kaylee and Jenna and the whole MHCCA team for giving us this opportunity to discuss this. Advancing this important work doesn't end today, and there are concrete ways you can stay involved. Firstly, you have until August 10th to review the draft strategy and email your thoughts and feedback directly to the federal government to participate in the consultation process. The government is legally required to read and consider all feedback that they receive during this consultation period, so your voice will go towards directly shaping the strategy. Right now, there's no government funding for community consultation work on the strategy. Donating to organizations like SUE and MHCCA make sessions like this one possible so that more people can learn about and engage in the process. We also encourage you to talk to your family and friends about what you've learned today. Send them a link to the letter template and encourage them to submit their feedback too. It's really easy to leave a session like this feeling overwhelmed and only focused on all of the negative things. So it's really worth naming that in this space, we're directly informing the government about how we want the ongoing environmental racism rectified and how to uphold environmental justice to protect marginalized communities from environmental harm in Canada. That is what your letter is for. By law, every letter sent to the government will be read during the policy consultation window and will advocate for the changes we'd like to see made. So yeah, just thank you everyone so much. Really appreciate all of your time today.